So welcome everyone. Today I'm excited to be hosting Planning a Show Congress event, a how-to guide and a micro grant opportunity. My name is Marley Townsend and I am the communications specialist for the League of American Bicyclists. If you've joined the League's webinar series before, welcome back. And if this is your first time tuning in to a League webinar, welcome in. Thank you all so much for joining us and taking the time to tune in today. So before we get started, just a few reminders that this session is being recorded. It will be sent out to the email that you registered with. And if you don't get it fast enough, you can also check our YouTube channel. We also try to keep our webinar archive up to date, and that will have the slides from all our presenters as well. Closed captioning is available and can be activated with a button that says CC at the bottom of your Zoom window. And for anyone who could use a transcript, there's a little arrow you can click on in that box that will kind of open up a transcript that will auto-generate as we go along. And finally, here are some tips on how to interact with panelists and each other during the webinar. You may have noticed that your microphones are muted, but we do really want some good engagement. The chat is a perfect place for that. So if you'd like to share where you're tuning in from, network with fellow attendees, the chat is a great place to engage and interact. But for specific questions that you want our panelists to answer, please direct those into the Q&A submission box. That it looks like a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can add questions in throughout the presentations, and then we'll go through those as many as possible during the dedicated Q&A portion of today's webinar. And now, before we get into the topic, let me take a quick second to talk about the League. You might already know who the League is, so feel free to get a cup of water while I give you a quick spiel here. But the League is the nation's oldest grassroots bike advocacy organization, leading the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. The League has been championing better biking for a long time. We originally started out advocating for the first paved roads in the 1880s so that cyclists could ride more safely, and to this day, we are still leading in the bike advocacy space. As I mentioned, our mission is to lead the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone, and we are very glad to have you all in the audience today as part of that movement, making biking better at the grassroots and local levels. And now I am excited to introduce our speakers today. Of course, given the topic around federal advocacy, we will be hearing from the League's Deputy Executive Director and our in-house expert on all things federal policy, Caron Whitaker. In her role as Deputy Executive Director, Caron helps with organizational strategy and leads the League's federal policy efforts to secure pedestrian and bicycle-friendly policies and funding through advocacy with Congress, the administration, and national advocacy partners. And today, Caron will be giving an overview on what exactly a Show Congress event is and why it's so important to build relationships with legislators. She'll also tell you about our exciting new microgrants to fund these Show Congress events, potentially in your district, and she'll share some key examples to inspire those applications. We will also hear from Rachel Schaeffer, who is the statewide coalition officer for Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Bikes, with a goal of bringing advocates together to advance policies and programs that make Washington State a better place to bike. She's been a walk bike advocate since 2019, after earning her master's in public health from the University of Washington. Originally from Indiana, where it's nearly impossible to get around without a car, she believes walkable, bikeable communities are essential to improving our community's physical, mental, and emotional health. And we certainly agree with that statement. And last but certainly not least is Dan Langenkamp. Dan is a lifelong cyclist and a foreign service officer with the State Department. In August 2022, his wife Sarah was killed while bicycling home from their son's elementary school, just weeks after their family had been evacuated to the United States from Ukraine. And since Sarah's death, Dan has campaigned for increased street safety in Maryland and nationally, raising more than $300,000 for bicycle and street safety organizations, passing a law named after Sarah in Maryland and advocating for a separate law in U.S. Congress that would make it easier for states to build biking and walking infrastructure. He has also organized several Ride for Your Life bicycling events, bringing together thousands of cyclists for rides seeking legislative changes to enhance roadway safety. A specialist in media and public affairs, he is retiring from the State Department in September. Congrats, Dan. He and his two boys live in Bethesda, Maryland. And Dan is also the founder of Sarah's Basket, which is a roadway safety memorial fund in honor of his late wife, which is funding our new microgrant program that Caron will discuss later. But just want to say that we are deeply grateful to Dan for being here today, and we are honored to support Sarah's legacy by helping build these relationships with legislators to reemphasize the importance of safe, connected places to ride, whether it's transportation, exercise, the joy of it, what have you. So I'm about to hand it over to Caron, but just a quick reminder of the format. We'll briefly hear from each speaker, and then we'll have the rest of the session for Q&A. So feel free to add questions in the submission box, and we'll go through as many as possible after the speakers wrap up. And with that, I'll pass it over to Caron.
Thanks, Marley. I'm going to just get my slides up. Okay, so thanks, Marley. Thanks, Dan and Rachel, for being here. And to all of you, we really want to promote Show Congress events because we've seen them work to both build relationships and improve an understanding in Congress about biking and walking and have that lead to better legislative outcomes. Basically, a Show Congress event is an event where you invite a member of Congress to see infrastructure or be with a group of people that are promoting and advocating for safe biking and walking. And like I said, it creates that relationship with them, both that influence legislation or just to say thank you if a member of Congress has been helpful. And again, you can do that by demonstrating the need for infrastructure, the benefit of that, who in their community supports that there's constituents that support it, and also just giving them a positive association with us as a bicycling movement and with biking and walking in general. These two pictures are of Senator Carper, where he's attending like a ribbon cutting for this bridge, which has this dedicated bike lane. That's him on the top. This was last year. And in this one, at the age of 78, Senator Carper said, you know what, I'm just going to show up and speak. We've seen a lot of other events with him, but up until maybe 5 or 8 years ago, he used to bike to the events and do that. So just one quick thing to think about when you're inviting a member of Congress, make sure it's an activity that they're comfortable with. Some of them love to bike. We did one with Senator Carper where he was having such a good time biking. He just biked right past the podium and kept going, and we had to like get his staff to chase him down and bring him back. But now he was more comfortable with this. Okay, another thing to consider is the timing. We're hoping through the mini grant program that you will do these grants in the calendar year of 2025. We can send you the congressional calendar, but just know that Congress members are in the district most Fridays and weekends. When there's a federal holiday, whether it's Veterans Day, Thanksgiving, even the Jewish holidays, you'll see they're off for a full week and in the district. And they have all of August off. So those are always good times to plan those events. When they're at home, they are looking for this kind of thing. They want to be in a place to be able to talk about either differences that federal legislation has made or differences it can make in the future. And also they have district staff, and it's their job to keep those members busy when they're in the district. So this is a two-way street. You're helping them out. So don't be shy about inviting them. Sometimes if you haven't worked with that member of Congress before, they might be a little nervous or they might just not be available. Another thing you can do is invite that district staff to come out, and then they'll get those same benefits. Maybe you'll get the member the next time. A couple of examples of events. We saw a ribbon cutting for a new bridge. Another option is to do the groundbreaking. Transportation projects take a long time. This is a way you can say thank you before the project's done. If you're thinking, oh, we just got that bike lane and we didn't do anything, maybe do an anniversary, of 1-year anniversary, or something else like that around the oops, sorry. A couple of other events. This one in Charleston, South Carolina was a demonstration project. They got a grant for about $15,000 from AARP, did this event, opened it during another public event where they had people give feedback. So that's an opportunity for a member of Congress to sort of see that. If you're doing one of these and you're having kids doing the painting, members of Congress love to have their picture taken with kids. You know, that's something to do. On the bottom left, this was the opening of a new bike share. In DC, I have gone to an opening of a bike rack. Like, you can do this around almost anything. If you've got staff or you've got a member who's sort of really into the issue, the idea of doing a walk audit or a bike audit is out there. The bike audit toolkit with AARP is something we worked on. There's also a walk audit that they did with America Walks to give them a sense of the issue. And the people in the district aren't as up on the specific issue, so that's always a good opportunity for them. See. Or maybe you've got an event going on that you just want to invite a member of Congress on. Uh, Walk to School Day, Walk and Roll to School Day is on a Wednesday this year. It's October 8th. So if you're in the DMV area or by DC, that's an option. But if you get a staffer, that's an option to do something like that. That's Secretary of Transportation LaHood between, I don't know, 2010-ish. The picture next to it, this is just something that fell on our lap. The Major Taylor Youth Club from Macon, Georgia, was on their way to a ride in New York. They gave us a call at the league and said, hey, do you want to meet these kids? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But what if we can get Senator Warnock to meet those kids? And so he just came out for 15 minutes, talked about biking, talked about where they were from. They're the first Major Taylor Youth Club in the country, and he is now the original sponsor of a bill to get Major Taylor a Congressional Gold Medal. This is a Kittical Mass ride that was going on in Chicago. Representative Quigley joined that. And then from that, he helped us get a biking and walking performance measure into law. This is one of Representative Blumenauer touring a local bike co-op that was really fun. I don't have a picture of it, but we had a Republican member of Congress from Pennsylvania who was doing a tour like that with a youth group at a bike co-op, ended up getting an earmark for that bike co-op. On the right, this is a picture of my local Open Streets event. And Charles Allen is my local council member. We really want to focus in on and ask you to do, federal Congress, but these events work for anyone. This is an opportunity, if you're already planning it, invite the office, invite the staff, especially if there's an opportunity for them to get on a stage and talk from a microphone. But even if they can walk around and see their constituents, having a good time, biking, walking, being outside, that can be helpful. All right, so in this last picture, this is former Congressman Larry Bucshon. He was a doctor before he came into Congress, and he was a little bit hostile. We couldn't even get him to meet with Bicycle Indiana at the bike summit. He only would meet with people from his district. So the state group worked with some other local groups, particularly a health group that was doing a ride to raise money. It was a local one. And they asked him to come and be the starter. I don't know if they had a gun or whatever, but he made a few remarks, said go, and then he and his wife got on the bikes. It just helped build that relationship, and a few years later, we actually got him to be original sponsor on a piece of legislation we were working on. So it doesn't always work that smoothly, but it definitely helps build those relationships. One last one is it can also help you. So this is Ayanna Presley at a bike month kickoff in Boston. So this was Mass Bike and some other local groups. They're at a brewery, and she gave these great remarks talking about biking and walking advocacy with everything else going on in the world right now. And in the end, she talked about the work she's doing on transportation in Congress and said it was because of the work of the local advocates. So, that's just a great moment where she helped bring people in. That's the message. That's great to have your members here. So these are just some different types of events you can do and some of the benefits of it. And then finally, just a little bit about these microgrants. We'll send more later. And again, thanks Dan and Sarah's Basket for funding these. What we're offering is up to $1,000 per event. We're looking mostly for state and local organizations to do it, those with a fiscal sponsor. It's just a really short Google form application. It's like 10 questions. What's your name? What's your email? What do you want to do? And the deliverables we're asking for is an event this year, some pictures and a blog. And if you have any questions on applying, please feel free to reach out to me. Those of you who know Riley Teitelbaum, who helps us with events and the summit, they're willing to help be a sounding board as you're going through your event and help with that. And then finally, this Engaging Congress in Your Community toolkit is now available on our website, and we'll send out that link. So thanks. And I forget who's next, but that's the end of my slides.
I think we're going to hand it off to Dan next. You're muted, Dan, at the moment.
All right, I'm back. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm going to try to make this work. Let's start this broadcast here. First of all, I just want to say, Caron, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about this. I have been, as you all know, as Caron said, involved in this at work since Sarah died. I've also been a public affairs officer in my entire career. And so when Sarah died, for me, it was almost a reflex to start doing public affairs events around what happened. I wanted the world to know what happened, and I wanted to try to make a difference. And so I began organizing events. And for me, the legislative piece of it was really, really important. And that's what's linked to today's theme. We had, I felt, to get members of Congress involved so that we could start passing laws that would make our roads safer. And so I began reaching out to members of Congress to hold these bike rides called Rides for Your Life. So we've done now 7 of them. And I'll talk a little bit about those today, and I'll talk a little bit about what has made them worked and what the challenges have been. So this is my wife, Sarah. She was a really lovely mom. This is her riding with our oldest son to school on the first day of kindergarten. She rode a bike just like this almost her entire life. In fact, her very first bike was just a mini version of this with a basket. And the reason we're calling the foundation Sarah's Basket is because it's to sort of evoke her memory and, evoke the number of things that she would put in there: her lunch, her shoes, her briefcase, anything. And so I hope that we can fund a lot of good things through this foundation. Here's the spot where she was killed. I just wanted to sort of give you a sense of the geography here. Classic arterial road. So we held the Ride for Your Life, the first one in 2022 on World Day of Remembrance for Road Traffic Victims. It was a great event that our member of Congress, Jamie Raskin, spoke at. And it was at that event where he said, we have to pass a law that's going to make it easier or that's going to save lives. And out of that emerged the bill that we're working on right now called the Sarah Langenkamp Active Transportation Safety Act that we are pushing along with the League of American Bicyclists and other organizations like People for Bikes in the US Congress and gaining a lot of traction for. We held some other bike rides. There was one in Madison in 2023 that also attracted members of Congress. That was instrumental in helping us get Ron Johnson, the very conservative Republican member of Congress, involved in supporting Sarah's law. We held another one in 2023 here in DC. We held one, a large bike ride with more than 4,000 cyclists in Boulder, Colorado, in memory of Magnus White, a champion U.S. junior cyclist who was about to depart for the World Championships of cyclocross in Europe when he was killed. That got the commitment from Congressman Neguse to introduce the new bill in Congress that would require all cars to have AEB that's sensitive for bicyclists, which is a really important piece of legislation. We held another one last year on World Day of Remembrance. And so these have been great events. Now, sort of how did we do these things? I guess that's what's relevant for you all. I'm going to race through these to make this presentation digestible. I really think the first thing that you have to do if you're going to set up one of these events for a member of Congress is really try to partner with other organizations to see where you can find synergies and how you can make your workload easier. Obviously, you all are bike organizations by and large, so you have the logistical expertise and stuff like that. But sometimes it is helpful to partner with the League of American Bicyclists, for example, if you're going to have a legislative ask. Or with another organization, maybe the Truck Safety Coalition, if there's a a reason to focus on trucking. I've always tried to have news hooks that will make it more interesting for both the media and for the member. So, Caron mentioned a lot of these, but you can really hinge your event on almost, any kind of news announcement. It can obviously be either the announcement of a new project being built. It can be even the announcement that the grant was won. It could be the groundbreaking. It could be the ribbon cutting. Any stage along this thing could work as a news hook. Obviously, there's news that you can hinge an event on. In my events, we built it around World Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims, but really the news was Sarah's death, which gained a lot of attention in the Washington, D.C. area. And that was the real hook. People, the news used that. And Jamie Raskin really felt compelled to attend because of this event and the profile that it had in his district. The announcements of statistics can also be a good news hook. So if your state has just announced that last year there were 300 people killed on the roads, pedestrians and cyclists, that's a news hook that you can use to hold an event with your member of Congress. There are obviously commemorative days like World Day of Remembrance or Bike to Work Day or victims or even other events related to cycling or pedestrian safety that can make sense. And then I would say another news hook could be just, anything that your Department of Transportation does, like they did in Washington, a walk around on a dangerous road. And that was a good reason to invite our member of Congress. So anyway, it's important to have that hook that makes it compelling for your member, but it doesn't have to be it doesn't necessarily have to have a hook. It just helps. Okay, so in terms of my advice for you, if you're going to bring a member, is try to make it as easy as possible for them. So I learned this after the first ride that I held, where we decided to do it on a particular day. And I had a hard time getting more than Jamie I wanted several members of Congress to show up, but we had a hard time getting more than him to show up because they were on recess. And so I would say the very first action should be reaching out to that member, finding out what their schedule is, and working around them if you can at all. It's super, super. Life is just, if they can't show up, then because of their schedule, you're just going to be miserable. Keep your event short. I would say 30 to 45 minutes so they can come in and go out very quickly. Make sure that you're on time. I would say during this whole process, make sure that you're just super responsive to them and flexible and that you follow up. For our events, I always tried to choose an iconic location that they would want to speak at. So I choose the Lincoln Memorial in DC, and we chose the lawn of Congress one time, but also my wife's crash site was an event site. So that really helps. The member will find it more compelling to show up at a place that's meaningful. Keep these events, tight with the number of speakers. I always have I've tried to keep it to 4 or 5. This is just, just budget for sound, but I would just keep it simple, like as you've seen with some of these other events that Caron showed pictures of, a simple lectern this is the Lincoln Memorial steps in this picture here is good enough. As long as you've got a good sound system that everybody can hear. Don't skimp on the sound system. Otherwise, keep it simple. You don't need a bunch of chairs. You don't need an awning, all that stuff. Okay. For me, media is very important. keep the events media friendly, create a plan, think about an op-ed, reach out to friendly journalists, meet those friendly journalists, you know, think about local broadcasters. They're going to want to do stuff before your event, perhaps during your event, and maybe even after events. Try to get, you know, a mix of people that are going to be committed. This is my son speaking to a local news station. Obviously, work on social media. If you can use vertical format social media that's friendly with Instagram and TikTok, that's really, really good. Keep that stuff informal and keep it authentic. And then bring in a professional photographer. Now, this is not related to a member of Congress specifically, but that's just for your event in general. I said a little bit about partnerships earlier, so I won't go over this again. Just do, you know, if you're going to do a big event, try to pull in as many people as possible. I use Trek Bicycle. That's John Burke, from the president of Trek there. Up in this picture above are all the local representatives from Montgomery County and Maryland. We brought them in. And then this gentleman speaking is the Maryland organizer for the Washington Area Bicyclists Association. So think broadly. The more people you can get involved, the more impactful you're going to be. Think about your specific objectives. Our objectives, and I really believe in these bicycling events for World Day of Remembrance, or bicycling events overall, because they really do help commemorate losses. But more importantly than that, they're a great vehicle to advocate for specific changes in law. So if you can combine an event with something that you really want, like one law, then it's great. And it can really help make a difference. We did this in Colorado. We did it here in Washington. And obviously they raise awareness with the general public through media. And one thing I didn't mention here, which I think is the most important thing, is that you, by bringing that member of Congress in, you create this relationship with them that makes them want to give back to this cause. The commitment that Jamie Raskin did that day, we had not discussed with him, but he was so emotionally invested. He became so emotionally invested in it that he felt compelled to say, we can do something about this. And so that was really great. Think about logistics. I won't go into this. You all know how to do that kind of thing. Link the event to policy asks. I mentioned that already. Use your coalition in that. Engage any family members if it's a victims event like mine, and recruit all kinds of legislators that you can. I won't talk about merch. You all know about those headaches. Oh yeah, this is the slide. I thought I had dropped this, but anyway, these events I'm a huge believer in them. And this is one reason why when Caron came to me saying, we'd like to sponsor, this grant opportunity for working with members of Congress, I thought it was such a good idea, because this is really the nexus between what your organization is doing on a day-to-day basis and the legislative process. I can't think of a better way to try to get legislation passed than to bring them into a public event, because you're galvanizing your community. The community is seeing how important this is. The member is seeing how important it is to the community. You're raising awareness. You're even raising funds for yourself. You're getting that commitment from a member. And then through this event, and I can say this from my personal experience, you are building credibility for your future efforts. By being an organizer of these big rides, suddenly for only that reason, I have an entry into a lot of members' offices. Certainly my member sees me as someone that's important in the community to meet with, and sees me as a person whose opinions matter. So hold them, because you're going to really increase your profile, both publicly and with the member himself. I won't go into that. Anything else? That's it. Thanks very much. I hope I didn't drone on too long.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Dan. And now I think
I'll
we will
stop
hand
sharing.
it over. Perfect. Yeah, we'll hand it to Rachel.
Great. I think I'll wait until the share screen. Oh, there we go. It's gone. Okay. My own. Thank you so much, Dan. I am in awe of how large the rides, the crowds that you were able to gather for your rides. It's very impressive. I'm sharing my screen now. It looks like it's working. Great. I'm Rachel Schaeffer. I'm the statewide coalition officer for Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Bikes. And I'm this afternoon talking on a very similar subject, of course, as Dan, but I'm going to, in efforts to not be too redundant, focus on the policy rides that my organization puts on, which are of a different scale. And sometimes we have done rides with our Congress members. We are often doing policy rides with local, county, and state officials as well. And I think much of what I'm covering is still very applicable to reaching out or to doing a ride with your Congress member as well. So very briefly, Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Bikes, we are two sister organizations statewide here in Washington State. Cascade is our 501c3. We're a nonprofit that serves bike riders of all ages and abilities. We educate riders, both youth and adults. We put on bike rides and events, large scale ones as well, but primarily as fundraisers. And then we also advocate for safe places to ride. Washington Bikes is our 501c4. We advocate for bicyclist rights. We endorse political candidates, hold officials accountable, and work for policies and programs through the state legislature. Excuse me. Cascade has been putting on what we call policy rides for a long time. And like I mentioned, we put them on for a variety of different levels of elected officials, everywhere from city council, like I said, all the way up to our state legislators and beyond. And we, as Caron and Dan have mentioned, the great reasons, there's a variety of reasons why we put on rides. And I'll just go through a couple short little stories of some rides that we've put on in the past, including some lessons learned. And then I'll move into a couple more of the logistics of what we found to be best practices over the years. So like it's been mentioned, highlighting new infrastructure is super important, especially when we like to really highlight, we'll highlight anything. Like Caron said, you can do a ribbon opening for a bike rack. I love that. Recently, we've done one for the waterfront route that's along the Seattle coastline because it's a multi-agency and almost a regional kind of effort. And so it's important to highlight all the different folks who brought this together, including our own advocacy efforts to improve the bike lane design along an on-street protected portion of the route because it changes different facility types throughout the way. Something about this particular environment in relation to elected officials is that the Port of Seattle commissioners were really a key stakeholder along the way because this is an active cruise, it's an active waterfront, and there are cruise lines that operate 100 days out of the year. And so just a lot of like different competing interests when it comes to trying to keep bicyclists and pedestrians safe. And while we were able to engage with the commissioners, we learned that was not a bike ride was not the necessarily method of engaging. We were going to get them to visit, but we were just as successful with doing a walk and talk instead. And so one of our takeaways from this was to not necessarily charge forward with a bike ride for every instance of success along this way. The other thing to note, and you probably already know this in the crowd, is when you're be very conscious of the route that you're taking. This is a moderately active construction zone, and we wanted to make sure people were safe. And we were really clear on when we'd be crossing the street across various times, so that people were safe and not running through areas that they shouldn't be. Another reason is, again, to draw attention to a need, whether that's a gap in a trail, a need for more funding, a need for awareness. This is a picture of a ride with our congressional representative, Rick Larson. He's the one speaking there. This kind of ride really speaks to the ongoing relationship with Rep. Larson that both ourselves and the local advocates, this is actually an area north of Seattle, have with him. And I believe in this instance, his staff actually reached out to us to help organize, knowing he'd be in the area for a short time, and could we put something together? So it's sort of a good validation too of like what others have mentioned of building that relationship to lead towards eventually this kind of almost easy access. However, not everything about this is easy. The other route consideration I want to draw attention to is when you're wanting to show something that does not exist, that should exist, and it is dangerous because there's no bike facility. Simply bringing a large group, and by large for here, I'm saying like maybe 35 people is large for us. It's usually a very direct, targeted group of invited stakeholders. But a group of even of 20 to 35 on a route that has no bike lane or has infrastructure problems can be really unsafe. One instance, not from this ride, from a different ride a couple years ago, was that we were arranged a ride with city council and county commissioners in the Kitsap Peninsula, which is across the water from Seattle, and the official bike route actually has to cross a rural highway. There's an access point from the south, you have to cross the highway, then you actually have to carry your bike upstairs. Clearly, this is not safe and connected infrastructure. The ride was meant to show this. However, while people were crossing the ride, the state patrol was actually called, pulled everybody over. It made some waves. Dan, what you were talking about with media, we got media attention for it. Maybe not the attention we meant to get. There were still some good takeaways from it. Obviously, it drew a lot more attention to this gap. There's no world in which this should be called a bike route, that you have to, that do it following what the signs say could get the cops called on you. So very much a lesson learned there in considering how far on the dangerous parts your route should go. One thing what's that? Oh, I'll
I was just saying that's incredible. That's you're causing some good trouble there, actually.
Yes, that was definition of good trouble. Something that hasn't quite been called out yet, I think, is these rides can introduce the experience of riding a bike to elected officials. We don't assume ever that that an elected has ridden a bike ever, or maybe just not in a while. And so a couple of years ago, we put on a ride that was specific to the infrastructure was in great shape, and we were highlighting a great regional trail, but we wanted to do it via e-bike. And so because of our resources, we were able to obtain a number of e-bikes for the elected officials. And a big note to remember there is to not make assumptions about what people's comfort level is on a bike, and to build in time to make sure that they're comfortable using the equipment before you begin the ride, especially with e-bikes, because I mean, this is only a couple years ago, but it's still safe to assume not everybody's been on one. And so the movement of an e-bike can be just different. You want to make sure someone doesn't just like press a throttle and fly right off. And then last, the note that's been made many times about building relationships with officials. We're working with local advocates on another trail gap that happens to cross many different city and county jurisdictional boundaries. And so a lesson we've taken from these either walk and talk or bike and talks that we've done is to not be afraid of repeating the event over and over again. There's so many different jurisdictions that are involved in this particular gap of the interurban trail that the local advocates and ourselves have partnered to do nearly identical events, simply to give more elected officials the opportunity to show up, see what we're talking about, learn about the proposed plans and the barriers that are in the way. Okay, and then I have some kind of nitty gritty, and I'm sorry for all the text, but I think I can fly through some of these. The main points I want to impress upon the logistics of the ride is, I think the biggest one is the safety. Thinking back to that route where the state patrol was called, if the reason for your ride and the strong connection to a project or a policy is a lack of something or a dangerous area, think about maybe whether you can ride up to it, stop and talk, and then turn around. If it's truly a gap like that. There's not always benefits of thrusting people into a truly unsafe situation. So work with others and your local partners and whoever might be helping you to figure out if the costs weigh and the benefits weigh each other. The other thing is to something that I've been learned a lot in putting these on is simply the time it takes to put them on. I think Dan's rides sound like they're events where maybe there's some speaking at the beginning. A lot of our rides have speaking throughout. We arranged for speakers to stop and address the group at key points throughout the way to call attention to an infrastructure, talk about a partnership opportunity, discuss a challenge that happened along the way, or simply, sometimes we even have people from like arts and culture talk about other elements to the trail besides just the bike and walking parts. And so all of those speaking parts, you need to have dedicated time for everybody to gather and listen. And that really stretches what you think what might normally take to cover 4 miles is going to take a lot longer. And maybe this is super obvious too, but your rides really shouldn't be that long. Think about if you're calling attention to certain infrastructure, think about what's the shortest distance you can cover to hit to make the impact you're looking for. Especially because when it comes to the comfort level of the electeds that you're inviting. I won't go through all of these roles here, but what I wanted to impress on this slide was that not to expect one leader to do too many things. I really recommend having the event lead be the person who is responsible for the elected, or even a couple people responsible for various electeds, depending on who's showing up, and have that be separate for someone who really knows the route. I think that's ultimately the important thing, is someone to address the group ahead of time. And we have, I think we'll probably send these links out ahead of time, but Cascade uses an acronym called SMART, and it's about safe group writing techniques. I don't think it's just ours. There's probably other groups that use it too, but it's like a five-letter acronym for the things that we all should keep in mind as we're writing together. And that's really useful for these groups of like 15 to 35, because it's just got a different vibe than when you've got a couple thousand people together. Although safety is important both. One other one I'll call out here is because ours are usually a pretty targeted invite list, we are often thinking of the stakeholders who will also benefit from relationship. We're sort of relationship sharing with the electeds that we're inviting. So some people, whether they may already have a speaking role, but then they'll also be what we consider like a floater. And they're just the people who we know ahead of time are comfortable riding alongside the elected. They're checking in, they're making sure no one's being left behind, and generally keeping the group together, because when you have only about 20 folks or so, it can be, we don't want it to make it obvious that there's some stragglers hanging back. Maybe they're not able, then we need to adjust and slow the pace down, or make adjustments in other ways. Preparation. The biggest thing that I've learned throughout putting these on is to pre-ride the route, sometimes more than once. If you know it's several months ahead of time and you've already pre-wrote it, still do it one more time, like 3 days before the event, in case there's in case there's unknown construction or anything has changed. And then I've talked about the group size and the biking comfort. The other thing is to, again, with groups of this size, is to have backup plans. What are you going to do if the elected suddenly can't show up? Or if the staff is showing up in their presence? Do you have an inclement weather plan? Things like that. And then the run of show refers to really the breakdown of when you're gathering when you've got such a small group like this, we like to do like introductions for everybody. It's much more about individuals getting to know the elected official. So think through, are you going to have time to do, are you going to build in time for introductions? Are you going to meet in a place that's quiet enough to hear the introductions? I can't tell you how many rides I've been to where we are shouting at each other to introduce each other. And sometimes the elected is really gung-ho for that, and others times they don't, they're not necessarily wanting to shout at the top of their lungs. Also why a speaker and a microphone is super important. And then Dan covered much better than I did the communications of all this. And I think it's just, it's important to think of how you're going to get media attention, broadcast it on social media. And one specific thing, again, for smaller group rides like this, is we found it very helpful to send out very specific details of the route, what to expect, what to wear, all the nitty gritty for the elected and the rest of the participants ahead of the ride, so that they are so that they're not taken by surprise in as many ways as we can possibly control. And that's my presentation. I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. And now here is time for the Q&A kind of portion of the event. And while we wait for some questions to come in, I actually have some questions for you all. So this one's related to kind of like more general event planning. How much lead time do you need to plan these events before you actually reach out to a member of Congress with an invitation?
That's such an important question. So, I think for a member, a couple of months is advisable. They're planning it that far out, and then get a sense from the staff. They'll tell you if you need to come back to them later. But if you can plant yourself on their schedule for when they're planning to travel back to their district, then you're going to be in good shape. And I want to underscore what Caron said. don't be shy about this stuff. Your member needs to do events. They, especially if they're friendly to your cause, they want to be there. They need to get themselves in the news. They need to get good relationships with constituents. They need to be known for their affiliation with your group. So, so try hard, be persistent. And if they don't get back to you, keep trying. If the local office doesn't get back to you, reach out to the Washington office, because maybe you just ran into a bad staffer. There's, a lot of busy people out there, so don't be shy.
That's a great answer. I have another question, unless Rachel or Karen, you'd like to hop in on this one.
No, I think Dan covered it. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, so also related to invitations, how do you know which official to invite? And would you ever want to invite multiple to the same event? How many is too many? 3 questions in one for you.
I can speak at least to, I've not done an event with multiple Congress members before, but as I mentioned in one of our stories, we have invited multiple local electeds, particularly city council members. We typically prioritize it just, I guess it depends on the context of the project. If the project is really local, say here in Seattle, we're going to choose the city council member whose district is represented. And then we have an at-large council member, sorry, 2 at-large council members. So those 3 would be our standard invites. So it's very geographical based. In fact, I guess I would broaden that, yeah, to once we're talking about more regional and bigger projects. Understanding too that the Cascade, like at Cascade, most of our events are in relation to a proposed project or funding package. So that might just look different than Dan's context of trying to pass like federal legislation. So that's what works for us.
I think typically you're going to want to bring in the member of Congress from your particular district. So that's one. And then for local representatives, I think, a lot of those guys will want to jump into your event if it's a bigger one. And then you need to start thinking very carefully about how many speakers you want to have. I don't think it's good for the audience to have to listen to 7 or 8 people talking. I think it's better to keep it pretty tight. And so, to make your decisions that way, which local rep is the most important for you to have there. And, or you can also divide the event in 2. So with my rides, we held 2 rallies. The first one was at the beginning of the ride, and I isolated the local politicians, the council members, state senators and stuff at the beginning, and I had them speak for just 1 or 2 minutes. And I kind of let that be the kind of chaff that, not chaff, but like the dogs and cats that were coming to us asking to participate. And then for the end of the ride, the stuff in front of the Lincoln Memorial or the lawn of the Capitol, I kept that tighter. And I had in one ride, we had just 1 member of Congress, and in another one, we had 2 members of Congress. And so, and I invited 2 in that case, and they both said yes. And I actually thought one of them was not going to show up, or something like that. So I would keep it. I would keep it pretty limited.
That actually reminds me, Dan, of we put on a couple of years ago, also on World Day of Remembrance, not a bike ride, but I guess a rally / press conference. It was a little amorphous, but something I would take away from that event where we did have multiple speakers. Now that I've done it once, they were all at the city council level, and I believe that then there was a speaker whose husband had been recently killed in a bike crash, and so that was the impetus for the event. One thing I took away from that is, because we had 2 last-minute no-shows, was to make my invite list a little bigger, assuming that I would not necessarily get all the speakers. However, then of course, if everybody says yes, then I run into the problem that you just talked about, and I would just probably shorten everybody's speaking time, because you're right, it is very hard to stand and especially November in Seattle is like the worst weather ever. So I try to be recognizing too what I'm putting people through in terms of waiting through all
Yep.
the speaking. So yeah.
That's what was going on with me too. Exactly. The weather is crap in November.
Yeah. The one thing I would add is pick the person who's most important. And for Congress, it should be your member of Congress. And once they say yes, you can ask them, hey, I was thinking of inviting some other folks. What do you think? And I would leave it broad at first and see how they respond. But like with Senator Carper, he was always happy to do things with the governor, who is also a bicyclist. And that's a great combination, right? But I think if you give them that option, you can do it that way. And then, especially if they say, just my boss, then they're on the hook to make sure that person shows up.
Those are all excellent answers. And just to pop in an additional question from the audience, how do you feel about mixing congressional representatives and state representatives in one event?
I think it's
I've
great.
always done that. Yeah, I've always done that. It actually is a nice, different, a nice thing to have, that kind of unity. It's energizing for everybody. And I think the member of Congress likes to see the constituents and the local representatives weighing in on this cause. It really that's what I think creates the energy of these events, when you get lots of different types involved. It makes it seem not just like a niche issue, but something that really matters to a lot of people.
Great.
Oh, that's so great. We haven't not done that, but you're making me want to do that, Dan. Yeah.
Well, speaking of what Congress likes, are there types of events that officials seem to prefer over others in your experience? Question to everyone.
They like to be told thank you. And so, especially if it's an event that's done that you can thank them for. The one thing I'll say is this is a very different event than if you're doing like a candidate forum or a town hall. This is a show Congress event is more it's like an education piece, get them out there. You're gonna have an ask, but maybe that ask is done a little bit in private, or they know the ask is coming. Because this is about building relationships. It's not the type of event where you want to have a gotcha moment.
Yeah, I don't think you want to, and like the tone of your event, I think should be positive. Or if not positive, then meaningful, like commemorating the death of a cyclist. I think overall, your congressman or person wants to know that this is an important event, that this thing matters, that their time is being well used. And you do that by having a good coalition, getting a good group of people to show up, getting media involved, so that their words are captured and broadcast to not just the 35 people that are there, but to hundreds of thousands of people on the local news. So that's why I said in my thing, like, really do think about the media piece, and then the more coalition members that you can bring in, the better that the more significant it's going to become. So with my ride, for example, I was lucky that John Burke, the head of Trek, from the very get-go said that he was interested. And I was also really lucky that a friend of mine that works at CBS News said that she was going to cover it. So I started in my invitation letters highlighting this, that we have John Burke, the head of Trek's going to be there, and CBS is going to cover it. It made it sound much more important. And then we built from there. So, do that, I would say.
Yeah.
One thing I would add to that, and Dan, I think actually brought this up when we were preparing for this, excuse me, is at least this is something I find from the organizational level as somebody who advocates, who speaks for bikes in all sorts of ways, is they want the reassurance that we are reasonable bike people. I think like the reasonable is not a very fun, like, love, it's not a fun sounding word to necessarily say, but that you can show and especially for if there are people listening in who are part of, sort of like community advocacy groups or very small organizations, you can put on a well-run event, use their time wisely. Like Caron said, thank them, give them the appreciation and the sort of the meaningfulness. Because depending on who we're reaching out to and trying to build relationships with, that has not always been their experience with people who ride bikes. So I feel a little bit of responsibility to make sure that we're coming across as like we're putting our best foot forward. We have very reasonable asks and points that we're making and showing you.
And I'd also say you can talk to the staff if you're thinking about whether it's a bike ride or it's a walk to school or something else. It's being able to tell them how much time it's going to take, and then let the staffer say, well, oh, my boss loves biking. He would love to do that. Or, you know what? They'd rather maybe just show up and speak. So if you can think about that event in that way, like Dan's event was a bike ride, Congressman Thompson did the whole bike ride. Jamie Raskin came and spoke at the end. So there was that flexibility for them on what they were comfortable with.
That's great. We just have a few minutes left, so we could take one more question, or I could also just run through my final kind of slides. I think let's go with that one just to respect everyone's time. And if you have follow-up questions, you want to know, how can I apply? What can I, what can I do? Listen.
Hey, Marley,
Oh yeah,
before you go, I'm sorry, before you go into that, can I just say one more thing?
sure.
I just want to say that, someone had mentioned repeat events, and, there are a number of members of Congress that do the same event over and over again. And once they've done it once and you've done it well, it's really 100% easier to get them to come the next time if you've done a good job. And so, if you're thinking about that for this fall, think about this carefully. Is this an event that you could carry on to the next year and make an annual thing with that member? It's great to have them there. It's really, really useful. And so just wanted to put that out there.
Absolutely. Rachel or Caron, do you have any final words of inspiration before I kind of wrap us up?
The last thing I'd say is if you're nervous about it, consider inviting the district staff to something first. Do a smaller event, do that, and then move to the event with the member.
And I would just say that you almost always in the aftermath of these, whether they're in memoriam or they're in a positive, yay, something just got built and we love this thing. At least personally, I can just say I always come away feeling so much more energized. I feel like this becomes the crux of what I'm trying to do. And so that keeps me motivated to go on and plan the next thing next year or 6 months from now and things. So I'm hopeful that anybody on the call who tries these has a similar kind of takeaway at the end.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. And here's just a couple final slides from me. Just wanted to give a thank you to our Silver and Up sponsors for the 2025 National Bike Summit who support our webinar series. And if you'd like to save the date for the next one, it is March 6, 2026. And our request for proposals is officially open as of yesterday. So if you have a big idea you want to share with the national audience of bike advocates, start working on your pitch now. But good news, you don't have to wait till next March if you want more league content. So our next 2 webinars are open for registration now. We've got a bikepacking 101 session coming up, and then a really cool one. Well, they're both really cool, but I'm very excited for the August 5th session where we'll be talking about election cycles, empowering 501c3 advocacy groups in local elections. And yeah, I just want to say, wrap it up by saying thank you again for taking the time to attend the webinar, and thank you very much to our speakers for sharing your expertise with us. And you can all find this recording and plenty more webinar resources at bikeleague.org/webinars. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Marley. Thank you, Caron.
Thank you both.
Bye.